What happens when a family suddenly notices the mother they've ignored, only because they want her money? Eleanor's quiet power shocks them all. What happened next left everyone in the room stunned. 4 years, no one really noticed Eleanor. She had been the linchpin of her family once, a woman who sewed every curtain, cooked every Sunday roast, and paid every overdue bill without so much as a thank you. But time, as it always does, changed things. The grandchildren grew into teenagers with lives of their own. Her son, Martin, moved his business hours farther away, always busy, rarely calling except on birthdays or Christmas. Her daughter-in-law, Pam, had developed a habit of briskly nodding at Eleanor as if she were one of the houseplants, something to be watered and dusted, but not really seen. The house that had once been so lively now echoed with the lonely sound of Eleanor's slippers against the kitchen tiles. The photos on the mantel told a different story. Holidays full of laughter, a golden anniversary surrounded by friends, her grandson Jamie grinning with cake on his face. But these days, even the pictures seemed faded. Eleanor kept herself busy. She tended her garden, wrote letters she never sent, and listened to the old radio that had belonged to her late husband, Tom. When she tried to offer advice or suggest changes around the house, Pam would interrupt, "We have it under control, Mom," dismissing her with a tight smile and a sigh. Martin, who had once come to her with every problem, now only came for dinner when Pam insisted or when he needed to borrow something. Her car, her recipe box, the heirloom watch that had been Tom's. "It's just for a while, Mom," he'd say, pocketing whatever he needed before disappearing for another month. On weekends, Eleanor watched from her window as Martin's family played in the yard, barely glancing her way. She waved at Jamie, now a young man with headphones always on, but he usually turned away, lost in his world. At church, people asked after her, but she sensed the pity behind their words. "You must be so proud of your family, Eleanor," the pastor's wife chirped, never guessing how lonely Eleanor felt when the doors closed behind her on Sunday afternoons. The days blended together. She felt herself shrinking, quieter, more careful, afraid of being a burden. But despite the isolation, Eleanor kept meticulous records. Old habits, drilled into her by years of careful budgeting and Tom's lessons on responsibility, never faded. She updated her will once a year. She saved every important document in a battered lockbox at the back of her closet: insurance policies, property deeds, her marriage certificate, and a dusty manila envelope labeled "Power of Attorney, Tom and Eleanor." One rainy Thursday, everything changed. Martin arrived without warning, Pam in tow, both of them wearing forced smiles and speaking with too much cheer. "We just wanted to check in on you, Mom," Pam gushed, ushering herself into the kitchen and immediately helping herself to the fridge. Martin lingered in the doorway, shifting from foot to foot. "We've been thinking, Mom. The house is a lot for you to manage, isn't it? Maybe it's time you considered options. You could sell, get a nice place at the Willow Oaks Retirement Village. They have all kinds of amenities, you know. Heated pool, weekly bingo." Eleanor stared at him, feeling the old familiar pang, disappointment wrapped in worry. "I like it here," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is my home." Pam exchanged a look with Martin, her voice lowering as she pulled up a chair. "Mom, we're only trying to help. The market is so good right now. We could get you a place closer to us, and with the money from the house, you wouldn't have to worry about anything again." Eleanor listened in silence, realizing suddenly that for the first time in years, they were actually looking at her. Not with affection, but calculation. She noticed Pam's quick glances at the old clock in the hallway, her subtle inspection of the furniture, the way Martin avoided her gaze as he scrolled through something on his phone, most likely real estate listings. The rest of the day was a blur. They left her with a stack of pamphlets for retirement homes, an invitation to dinner next weekend, and the unmistakable feeling that her life was being organized without her consent. That evening, as the rain beat against the windows, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table and opened her lockbox, spreading out her life on the worn tablecloth. She read through every document, her heart heavy with memory and foreboding. When she found the faded power of attorney form, she nearly set it aside, until she read the small, neat handwriting at the bottom. "This document grants Eleanor Mayfield full authority over all family financial matters in the event of Tom's passing." Eleanor's eyes widened as realization dawned. She had forgotten this detail. Forgotten, because no one had needed her for anything in so long. But now, as the night closed in and her family's motives grew clearer, Eleanor felt a long dormant strength awaken inside her. They had ignored her for years, made her invisible in her own life. But now they wanted her money, and they were about to learn she was no one's fool. The next morning, Eleanor's household was filled with a tension she could almost taste. The pamphlets left behind by Martin and Pam sat in a neat pile on the kitchen table, their glossy photos showing smiling seniors playing bridge and attending water aerobics. The cheerful images felt like an insult, as if happiness could be purchased and loneliness solved with a swimming pool and scheduled crafts. Eleanor stared at the pamphlets while sipping her tea. Her mind whirred with thoughts of the old power of attorney document, Tom's signature still crisp beside her own. She wondered what Martin and Pam would say if they knew she held the true reins of the family finances. The idea made her lips curl into the faintest of smiles. A few days passed in uneasy silence. Martin's calls grew more frequent and businesslike. "How are you feeling, Mom? Still thinking about that retirement place? There's a unit opening up at Willow Oaks, but it'll go fast. Want me to call the realtor?" Eleanor knew the tone. It was the voice of someone negotiating, not caring. Pam, too, began showing up at odd times. Once, she brought over a pie, chatting distractedly while checking out the living room, making mental notes about the antiques and the piano. Another afternoon, she arrived with Jamie, who asked, "Grandma, can I have your old bike? Mom says you don't ride it anymore." Pam just watched, waiting for Eleanor to say yes, eager to see another piece of the house disappear. Eleanor maintained her gentle smile, quietly observing it all. But inside, her resolve grew. That night, she returned to her lockbox, reading the power of attorney again and researching online. She learned what powers it gave her: the right to manage accounts, approve or block sales, even override decisions about the house if she deemed them not in the best interest of the family. 2 days later, Martin called with what he thought was good news. "Mom, we found a buyer for the house. They're offering over market. You'll have plenty for Willow Oaks and then some. Let's get the paperwork started. You just need to sign a few things." His tone was upbeat, but his words made Eleanor's hands tremble. She agreed to meet with them at the family lawyer's office. "I'll bring all my documents," she said, voice steady. Martin seemed relieved, too relieved. The meeting was set for Thursday. Eleanor spent Wednesday gathering everything: her will, the power of attorney, Tom's old letters, insurance forms. She called the lawyer, Mrs. Harper, and requested a private chat before the meeting. "There's something you should see," she told the receptionist. Mrs. Harper, always respectful of Eleanor, made time that very afternoon. At the law office, Eleanor spread out her papers across the polished desk. Mrs. Harper adjusted her glasses, reading the power of attorney twice, then again. Her expression shifted from routine politeness to quiet respect. "Mrs. Mayfield, do Martin and Pam know you hold this power?" Eleanor shook her head. "They've forgotten. Or they never knew." Mrs. Harper gave her a slow smile. "You have more control than you think. You can stop any sale. They can't touch a thing, not the house, not the accounts, unless you approve. If they try to coerce you, it's illegal." Eleanor let the words settle. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt armed. The next morning, Martin and Pam picked her up for the meeting, chatty and falsely cheerful. In the car, Martin went over the benefits of moving and how the money would help the whole family. Pam chimed in about the fresh start. Eleanor nodded along, clutching her bag. At the lawyer's office, Mrs. Harper greeted them warmly and invited everyone to sit. Martin launched into his pitch, sliding a stack of documents toward Eleanor. "Just sign here, Mom. It's all standard. We've already got an offer. It's a great deal for you." Eleanor didn't touch the pen. Instead, she calmly pulled out the power of attorney, sliding it across the desk to Mrs. Harper. "Before we do anything," Eleanor said, voice clear and steady, "I'd like to discuss this document." Martin froze, caught off guard. Pam's mouth tightened. Mrs. Harper cleared her throat. "Mr. Mayfield, Mrs. Mayfield, before any decisions are made, we need to address Eleanor's legal authority in this matter. As her attorney in fact, she holds sole power to approve or deny any financial transaction concerning her estate." The silence in the room was absolute. Eleanor looked at her son, seeing, for the first time in years, the little boy who used to run to her when he was scared. She straightened her back. "I will not be signing anything today." Martin opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. Eleanor turned to Mrs. Harper. "Thank you. That's all I needed to say." For the first time in years, Eleanor didn't feel invisible. She felt invincible. The ride home from the lawyer's office was filled with a silence thick enough to choke on. Martin's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw set in a stubborn line. Pam fidgeted in the back seat, shooting glances between her husband and Eleanor, as if trying to gauge whether the sudden storm had passed or only just begun. Eleanor, for her part, sat serenely, hands folded over her purse where the power of attorney document rested. She gazed out the window, the city passing in a blur of red and gold as the late afternoon sun slanted across their route. Her heart beat fast, but her mind was clear and her resolve stronger than ever. Pam finally broke the silence as they turned onto Eleanor's street. "You could have told us about that paperwork, Eleanor. We were just trying to help." Eleanor kept her gaze on the passing trees. "You never asked, Pam. You only assumed." Martin pulled the car up to the curb, but didn't immediately turn off the engine. "Mom, you don't have to be so difficult. If you just sign, everyone could move forward. We're not trying to hurt you." His voice sounded wounded, but underneath she heard frustration, not love. Eleanor met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "You are not listening, Martin. You're trying to manage me like a business deal. This house isn't just property. It's my life." She stepped out before he could argue, her steps deliberate, dignity radiating from every line of her posture. She heard Pam mutter, "She's going to make this impossible," as she closed the front door behind her. Inside, Eleanor felt an odd lightness. She moved to the kitchen, brewing herself a pot of tea and sitting at the table, thinking through her next moves. She wasn't just blocking a sale, she was declaring, in every action, that she would not be erased. The following day, she began reclaiming her space. She polished Tom's old radio, set her favorite quilt back on the couch, and organized her mail into neat piles, determined to handle every detail herself. She called the utility companies to double-check that all bills remained in her name. She even scheduled a maintenance check on the house, letting the neighbors see that she was still very much in charge. Martin and Pam, unwilling to give up, tried new tactics. They arrived with Jamie and the grandchildren, attempting to create a scene of family togetherness. Martin made a show of asking, "Don't you want to be closer to us, Mom? Jamie misses you." But Jamie, lost in his phone, barely glanced up. Eleanor made hot chocolate for everyone and watched as the children spilled marshmallows across the table. Pam fussed over a chip in the paint, and Martin roamed the living room, eyeing the art on the walls. She said little, letting their efforts bounce off her silence like rain off a roof. That night, Pam called and left a long message on the answering machine. "Eleanor, you're being unreasonable. If you really cared about family, you'd make things easier. Think about Jamie's future. Think about us. You're being selfish." Eleanor listened to the recording twice, her resolve hardening with every word. She spent the next hour sorting her files, updating passwords, and making a checklist of every right the power of attorney gave her. She called Mrs. Harper, her lawyer, for a follow-up, requesting that all official communications now pass through her office. For the next week, Martin and Pam tried to guilt her with calls, texts, even a visit from Pam's sister, who arrived unannounced with a pie and a litany of concerns about your health. Eleanor was polite but unmoved, gently escorting each intruder to the door. She was no longer a background figure in her own life. She was the author of every day that passed, defining the terms, setting the boundaries, refusing to yield. Each time she opened her lockbox and saw the yellowed power of attorney, Eleanor felt stronger. She was not alone, not outmatched, and certainly not invisible. She was the nightmare her family never expected. And her fight was only beginning. The next weeks were a whirlwind of schemes, hurt feelings, and newfound resolve. Martin and Pam refused to accept Eleanor's quiet authority, doubling down with new strategies. Their friendly masks slipped, revealing flashes of resentment, fear, and entitlement. Pam orchestrated a surprise family dinner, hoping to corner Eleanor when she was surrounded by relatives. The dining room table was set with Eleanor's own china, and the food, catered, not homemade, sat steaming on silver platters. Eleanor arrived dressed in her Sunday best, dignity radiating from her, refusing to let them see her rattled. Dinner began with stilted small talk. Martin praised the house's old charm, not so subtly mentioning how buyers just love this kind of architecture. Pam chimed in with tales of friends whose parents found so much happiness at Willow Oaks. The grandchildren, coached beforehand, dutifully asked, "Grandma, don't you want to be closer to us?" Eleanor listened to it all with polite silence, her answers short and neutral. The meal dragged on, tension building with every course. Finally, Pam tried to press the point. "It's time to think of what's best for everyone, Eleanor. You could help all of us with your decision." Eleanor set down her fork, folding her napkin with care. She looked around the table, at faces that should have been her greatest comfort, now only sources of pain. "What's best for everyone, or what's easiest for you?" she asked, her voice calm, cutting through the chatter. The room went quiet. Martin tried to recover with a laugh, but no one joined in. After dessert, Eleanor excused herself. In her room, she sat at her vanity, hands trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally speaking truth aloud. She made notes in her journal, recording every word and detail. She emailed Mrs. Harper with a full account of the dinner, asking for advice on how to best document these attempts at coercion. The next day, Pam arrived unannounced, letting herself in with a spare key. She began packing up knickknacks and old photos, claiming she was helping you declutter, Eleanor. Eleanor calmly asked her to stop, and when Pam refused, she called the police, her first time ever doing so. The officers arrived, took Eleanor's statement, and explained to Pam that she had no right to touch anything without explicit permission. Word traveled fast through the neighborhood. For the first time in years, Eleanor's friends and church acquaintances checked in. "Is everything all right, dear?" Mrs. Livingston from across the street brought muffins and a hug. Mr. Chow from 3 doors down offered to help with yard work. Eleanor realized she had more allies than she thought. Martin, seeing his wife's plan backfire, tried a softer approach. He apologized for the stress, insisted he just wanted what was best, and begged her to think about the family. Eleanor thanked him for his concern but reiterated her decision. She would not be leaving her home, and the power of attorney made that final. That weekend, Martin and Pam convened a family intervention, inviting extended relatives to sway Eleanor. The living room filled with concerned faces, many of whom hadn't called in years. Martin laid it out. "Mom's not well. She needs our support, and she needs to let go." Eleanor stood, unafraid. "I am not unwell. I am not confused. And I am not alone. This is my home. If you care about me, respect my choice. If you don't, you are free to leave." Her words landed hard. Relatives shuffled their feet, embarrassed. Some quietly slipped out. Others hugged Eleanor, apologizing for not visiting sooner. After the intervention failed, Martin and Pam's desperation boiled over. Eleanor received veiled threats, talk of contesting the power of attorney, whispered accusations of mental decline, even a call from a supposed social worker asking about her capacity to live alone. Eleanor saw through it all and provided Mrs. Harper with every detail. With every challenge, Eleanor only grew stronger. She surrounded herself with supportive friends, secured her home, and made sure the local authorities had copies of her legal documents. She was no longer invisible. She was a force, standing guard over her own future. And Martin and Pam, once so sure of their power, now found themselves facing a woman they barely recognized, a mother who had become their worst nightmare. The fallout from the failed intervention spread through the family like wildfire. Pam, humiliated by being confronted by police and neighbors, retreated into silence, her phone calls turning cold and clipped. Martin tried one last round of manipulation, arriving early on a Saturday morning with legal forms tucked beneath his arm, pretending concern while hiding impatience. Eleanor met him at the door, not inviting him in. "If you've come to talk about the house, Martin, you can save your breath." Her voice was even, but steel threaded every syllable. He hesitated, standing awkwardly on the porch. "Mom, listen. You're making things harder for everyone. Pam and we've had some financial setbacks. If we don't sell, we're going to lose our place. Jamie's college is on the line." His eyes pleaded, but Eleanor saw the calculation behind them. She didn't flinch. "You should have thought of that before trying to take what wasn't yours. I've worked too hard, for too long, to hand everything over now. Martin tried guilt, then anger, his voice rising. This is what Dad would have wanted. He'd want you to help your family, not cling to this old house. Eleanor felt her chest tighten, the familiar ache of missing Tom, but she stood her ground. Your father respected me. He trusted me. That's why he left me the final say. And that's what I'm doing now. Defeated, Martin turned and left, slamming the door behind him. After he was gone, Eleanor called Mrs. Harper and explained everything. The lawyer assured her, "He has no standing, Eleanor. The power of attorney is airtight, and your mental competency is beyond question. If they try to push further, we'll respond legally." That afternoon, Eleanor took steps to tighten her defenses. She changed the locks and security codes, making sure only she and Mrs. Harper had the new information. She went through every account, updating passwords and removing Pam and Martin as authorized contacts. She even called the utility companies, requesting they flag her account for any suspicious activity. Eleanor also made a trip to the bank, requesting a private meeting with the branch manager. She brought the power of attorney, Tom's will, and all supporting documents. The manager, impressed by her preparation, marked her accounts with a note, "No changes without Mrs. Mayfield's explicit consent." They arranged for an alert to be sent to both Eleanor and her lawyer if anyone tried to access or transfer her funds. With her legal and financial fortress secure, Eleanor found unexpected peace. She realized she was no longer fighting just for herself, but for every older woman who'd been made to feel small, invisible, or powerless. Word spread in her community. Eleanor Mayfield was not to be trifled with. Her church friends came more often. The neighbors stopped to chat and offer support. Jamie, embarrassed by his parents' actions, showed up with a sheepish smile, asking if she'd teach him her favorite card games. Eleanor welcomed him, on her terms. One evening, as the sun set, she wrote a letter to her late husband. She described the struggle, the betrayal, but also the pride she felt in finding her voice again. She tucked the letter in her journal, alongside the power of attorney, and promised herself she would never be invisible again. That night, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. It was a lawyer hired by Martin, leaving a terse voicemail. "Mrs. Mayfield, we intend to challenge your competency and contest the power of attorney in court." Eleanor listened, her jaw set. Instead of fear, she felt fire. She was not only ready for a fight, she was already winning it. A summons arrived 3 days later, a formal court notice, requesting Eleanor appear for a competency hearing. The document was cold and official, stamped with a date and time in bold ink. Martin and Pam, undeterred by every failed tactic, had resorted to the last, desperate weapon, dragging her into court, hoping a judge might declare her unfit and seize control of her estate. Eleanor took the letter to Mrs. Harper. Together, they built a meticulous case. Mrs. Harper scheduled an independent evaluation with Dr. Jensen, a respected geriatric psychiatrist, who spent an afternoon chatting with Eleanor over tea and cookies. They discussed everything: current events, finances, the names and birthdays of each grandchild. Dr. Jensen left with a warm handshake and a reassuring smile. "You're as sharp as anyone I've met, Mrs. Mayfield." The week before the hearing, Eleanor's home became a hive of support. Her church friends organized meals and rides. Neighbors brought over flowers, fresh bread, and encouragement. Jamie stopped by almost every evening, apologizing for his parents, helping with small chores, and, when no one else was around, thanking Eleanor for teaching him what strength really looked like. The morning of the hearing, Eleanor dressed with care, her best navy suit, Tom's pearl brooch on her collar, and the lockbox with every crucial document resting in her bag. Mrs. Harper picked her up, offering a quiet pep talk in the car. "This is your story, Eleanor. Tell it your way." At the courthouse, Martin and Pam arrived with their lawyer, whispering frantically. They looked at Eleanor as if seeing her for the first time, a woman not just standing her ground, but commanding the room. The judge, an older woman with kind but discerning eyes, called the case to order. Martin's lawyer went first, arguing that Eleanor was isolated, forgetful, and unable to manage her own affairs. He produced a series of dubious notes, vague allegations, and references to the stress the situation was causing the family. Mrs. Harper countered with precision: records of Eleanor's financial transactions, letters of support from neighbors and friends, a statement from Dr. Jensen confirming her sound mind, and the power of attorney's language granting Eleanor explicit, unambiguous control. Eleanor herself spoke, her voice steady and strong. "I am not a burden to be managed. I have kept this house and this family together for decades. My decisions are my own, and I will not be stripped of them because others find my independence inconvenient." The judge listened, took notes, and asked questions about Eleanor's daily routine, her understanding of finances, even her plans for the future. Eleanor answered every question with clarity and resolve. At last, after a tense recess, the judge returned to deliver her decision. "I find no evidence of incompetence. Mrs. Mayfield is not only fit to manage her affairs, but an example of self-reliance and prudence. This court will not entertain any further petitions unless supported by compelling evidence." Martin's face flushed with humiliation. Pam avoided Eleanor's gaze. Eleanor let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her hand found Mrs. Harper's, squeezing it in gratitude. After the hearing, Jamie ran to hug her. "I knew you'd win, Grandma," he whispered, grinning wide. That evening, Eleanor returned home, her home, welcomed by the scent of flowers, the laughter of friends, and the sweet relief of justice. She had entered the lion's den and emerged, not only unscathed, but triumphant. With the judge's decision echoing in her heart, Eleanor walked out of the courthouse with her head held high, sunlight warming her face. The courthouse steps were crowded. Neighbors, friends from church, even her bridge partners had come to show support. Jamie ran ahead, snapping a candid photo of his grandmother smiling, her navy suit immaculate, her pride unmistakable. Martin and Pam, for the first time, seemed truly defeated. Pam wouldn't meet Eleanor's gaze, her usual bravado gone. Martin looked lost, shuffling papers and mumbling apologies that never quite reached his mother's ears. As Eleanor made her way home, accompanied by Mrs. Harper and a chorus of well-wishers, she felt the burden of years of invisibility falling away, replaced by something fiercer, respect, hard-won and well-deserved. Back at the house, she hosted a small gathering. Her friends brought casseroles and lemon bars, Mrs. Franklin arrived with fresh roses from her garden, and Jamie surprised her with a handmade, world's best grandma card. Laughter filled the rooms that had been so heavy with tension and uncertainty. Stories flowed, memories were shared, and Eleanor found herself at the very center of it all. No longer a background figure, but the heart of her own story. She called Mrs. Harper aside and signed updated legal documents, ensuring no one could ever contest her rights again. The power of attorney was reinforced, a new will drafted and witnessed, and copies securely filed away. Eleanor also wrote letters to the bank, the insurance company, and the utility providers, confirming that she alone was the decision-maker from this day forward. As news of her victory spread, something remarkable happened. People reached out, not just to congratulate her, but to ask for advice. Older neighbors asked how she'd protected herself. Women at church wanted tips on organizing their finances. Even strangers from the community center called to hear Eleanor's story, how a quiet woman had become a beacon for anyone who'd ever felt erased. Martin called once more, this time without anger. He apologized sincerely and promised to respect her wishes from now on. Pam wrote a short, stilted letter, asking if Eleanor might want to see the grandchildren when things settled down. Eleanor responded graciously but with boundaries, "You're welcome in my home, if you come with respect." With every step, Eleanor reclaimed the life she'd nearly lost. Her routine now included lunches with friends, afternoons volunteering at the library, and evenings spent in her garden, sometimes with Jamie by her side. She knew she would never be taken for granted again. One evening, after a long walk in the neighborhood, Eleanor sat down to write in her journal. She reflected on the journey, the pain of being overlooked, the loneliness, the moments she almost gave up. But above all, she remembered the moment she found her strength, the instant she realized that being needed was not the same as being loved, and that real love could never be demanded or bought. Her nightmare had become their reckoning, but more importantly, it had become her awakening. She was no longer invisible. She was Eleanor Mayfield, fierce, unbreakable, and finally, truly seen. Months passed, and Eleanor's home thrived with new life. The tension that had once haunted the hallways faded, replaced by the laughter of friends, the warm bustle of community, and the quiet joy of belonging. Eleanor found herself at the heart of a circle that only grew wider. Neighbors, former strangers, and women from the church gathered for coffee, card games, and conversations about protecting what mattered most. Inspired by her ordeal, Eleanor began volunteering at the local senior center, quietly mentoring others who had faced similar threats. She hosted informal workshops on organizing legal documents, reviewing wills, and understanding power of attorney forms. "You are never powerless," she would say, "if you know your rights." More than a few women, some older, some not much younger than Pam, left her kitchen table with renewed confidence and practical advice. The community center director asked Eleanor to share her story at the annual meeting. She stood before a packed room, nerves fluttering but voice strong, telling how she had gone from being invisible to unbreakable and how others could do the same. The applause at the end brought her to tears. People lined up afterward to thank her, ask questions, and share their own stories of survival and awakening. At home, Jamie visited often. The bond between grandmother and grandson was different now, closer, more honest. Jamie confided in her about school, his hopes for the future, even his regrets about how little attention he'd paid before. Eleanor smiled, knowing her story had reached him in ways words never could. Martin and Pam, chastened and quieter, kept their distance for a while. Eventually, Martin called, not to ask for anything, but to truly apologize. "You taught me a lesson I'll never forget, Mom," he admitted. "I'm sorry it took losing everything to see you for who you are." Eleanor forgave, but she did not forget. She invited them to Sunday dinner only after making her boundaries clear. When Pam arrived with the grandchildren, it was with new respect and a sense of humility. The family began, slowly, to heal, not in the old way, but on Eleanor's terms. Late one afternoon, Eleanor sat in her garden as the sun slipped behind the maples. She sipped her tea and read through the stack of thank-you notes she'd received from others she had helped. Each letter, each story, was a reminder that her struggle had meaning beyond her own kitchen window. As twilight settled, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Her journey had been hard, but it was not for nothing. She was no longer invisible, nor just a nightmare in her family's cautionary tale. She had become a light for others, a quiet but mighty force, proving that dignity, wisdom, and courage can never be taken from those who choose to stand tall. Eleanor Mayfield's legacy would never be money, or even the house itself. It would be the fierce, simple truth that had saved her life and inspired others. You are only invisible until you decide to be seen.